Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear participants and dear colleagues, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening based on wherever you are in the world joining us online or here in person in Geneva. It is our pleasure to welcome you to our event Exploring Futures for Peace, Security and Disarmament. My name is Giacomo Persipaoli. I'm the head of the Security and Technology Program here at UNIDIR, and I wish to extend once again a warm welcome to all of you. And thanking you for taking the time to join us today and for your interest on our work on this topic. It's you will have seen outside of the room, fresh from the print shop, new publication that we're very pleased to launch with you today. I'm really delighted that so many distinguished participants from governments, international organizations, civil society, and research institutions have decided to join us today, both in person and online. As many in our audience are aware, UNIDIR is a voluntarily funded autonomous research institute within the UN focused on contributing impartial and evidence-based research as means to help inform ongoing multilateral processes that are related to disarmament, arms control, and international security more broadly. But informing the present is only half of our mandate. The second half really calls on UNIDIR to look at the future and carry out in-depth, forward-looking, and long-term research so as to provide a general insight, and I'm reading for our own statute, into the problems involved and stimulating new initiatives for new negotiations. And it is in line with the spirit of this specific part of our mandate that we decided last year to embark on this exploration of the year 2045, the 100th anniversary of the UN, and to try to understand what kind of futures we may find ourselves living in from an international security and disarmament perspective. I have the pleasure of moderating today's event, which launches our new report, International Security in 2045, Exploring Futures for Peace, Security and Disarmament. You can access the publication both online on our website, and if you're here in Geneva, you can grab as many physical copies as you want from the table outside the room. This project used foresight techniques to explore future threats to international security that are linked to arms control and disarmament, with a view to identifying options for action available today to mitigate, or at least try to mitigate, some of these identified challenges. The purpose of this launch event is to present the report and its findings to the broader community, which includes, of course, member states and the diplomatic community, but beyond that, also UN colleagues, civil society actors that are working on issues related to security and threats to peace, arms control and disarmament, and more broadly, conflict and conflict prevention. By socializing this report, we intend not only, of course, to raise awareness of its existence and its findings and what we've discussed, but also trying to socialize among all of these different communities the use of foresight as a methodology. It's a methodology that we think has a lot to offer to the international peace and security discourse, no matter from which angle you are tackling it, whether from the political angle, whether more from a civil society angle. I think there is a lot that strategic foresight can do. So this is really trying to be a seed into that debate, and hopefully also be one of the issues, one of the initiatives that we will take in the lead up to the summit of the future scheduled for September this year. Now, before we dive into the substance of this event, just a couple of quick housekeeping and administrative announcements. There will be time for Q&A at the end of the presentation and of the panel. For those of you that are joining us online, I can see the chat here on my screen, so please, you will have the option to take the floor if you so wish, raise your virtual hand, and we will give you the chance to speak or submit your questions in the chat. In that regard, for those of you who are here in the room, I've just been informed that the audio coming from online is only available if you're wearing your earpiece. So if you're just looking at the screen, it's going to be a very silent meeting, but if you're putting your earpiece on, you'll be able to hear also any intervention made virtually. We will be recording this event so that we can then publish it later on all of our social media platforms. So That's it for me. Thank you again for joining. And before we start we delve into the discussions substantively, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Robin Geist, the director of UNIDIR, for some welcoming remarks. Robin, over to you.
Thank you, Giacomo. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon from Geneva, and a very warm welcome to this launch event, launch of our report on international security in 2045, at a time where it's hard to know, of course, what will happen next year. 2045 is a tall order in terms of perspective. Nevertheless, we have tried, and I think we must try. Not reading the crystal ball about ultimate truth of how the future will come about, but options, hypotheticals, trends that we can already discern today. You will probably all be aware that the UN started the Common Agenda, release of the Common Agenda in 2021, has engaged in a number of stock-taking exercises in terms of where we are regarding global challenges and the state of the multilateral structures and governance systems that are currently in place. And increasingly, I think there is a discernible trend within the UN, certainly, to focus more on foresight-related activities to enable us to, in the here and now, take care of urgent needs, but at the same time, take into consideration future challenges as they will evolve. You can see that clearly in the Common Agenda, which is, of course, the document that called for the Summit of the Future, which will be taking place later this year. It's quite discernible as well in the new Agenda for Peace, which is, of course, also more specific to the thematic area in which UNIDIR works. It states, the new Agenda for Peace states explicitly that to achieve lasting peace and prosperity, we must adapt to the geopolitical realities of today and the threats of tomorrow. And the policy brief, United Nations 2.0, these are, by the way, 2 of the 11 policy briefs that the Secretary General's office has released in the run-up of the Summit of the Future. And the policy brief on the United Nations 2.0 explicitly calls for embedding and increasing the use of innovation and foresight, among other approaches, to support the work of the United Nations. And if you look around the United Nations system, I think you can see that trend materializing in different corners of the organization and the organizational family. Overall, there's a particular importance placed on futures and strategic foresight as tools to be employed to enhance the United Nations areas of work by the Secretary General and really across the UN more broadly and generally. And UNIDIR, of course, endorses this message. And through the launch of today's report, and as we are a think and do tank, UNIDIR has already started acting upon the embedding of the use of future-focused approaches. And we feel that UNIDIR is particularly well placed to undertake this type of work. Its future-oriented outlook was already embedded in its statute by the very foresighted member states at the time. UNIDIR is almost 45 years old. So in 1980, when our statute was adopted by the member states in the General Assembly, they laid down that among UNIDIR's core functions would be that of carrying out more in-depth, forward-looking, and long-term research on disarmament, so as to provide, and I'm reading from the statute, to provide a general insight into the problems involved and stimulating new initiatives for new negotiations. That's exactly what we're mandated to do and what we're trying to do. And if you fast forward from 1980 into the present, UNIDIR has now set up a Futures Lab. You will have heard me speak about it on a couple of occasions already. A Futures Lab at UNIDIR which aims to conduct this forward-looking long-term research on the various global security dynamics that we're currently seeing. It's an era of cascading crisis, of at least there is a pervasive sense of almost overwhelming complexity in the current geopolitical setup. And we feel that, of course, not in lieu of, but in addition to all the very concrete work that we're doing as a think tank, we also want to be able to provide more of a bird's eye perspective with a future outlook of where the current trends could be going in the future. So we really feel a responsibility here, also with significant stagnation in the multilateral system. This foresight methodology is a technology provides a set of tools that enables us to think more creatively about possible solutions for tomorrow. And if we look around us, I feel it's urgent times to engage exactly in that type of exercise to set us up for better global security dynamic management in the 21st century. Now, the report that we're launching today really forms one of our first undertakings under the aegis of the lab, the Futures Lab, but it will certainly not be the last. Now, I should say, and Giacomo already mentioned it, we are a voluntarily funded institute. Therefore, without the voluntary support of our increasingly diverse and growing set of donors. I'm very happy to say that in a difficult time, you know, there's a liquidity crisis, but in UNIDIR, I think we've been fortunate with a growing donor base. But our work wouldn't be possible without them. And especially this more explorative work really also hinges on unearmarked funding that we're receiving. So I just really want to express our deep gratitude for the support that many of you are providing to the Institute. Thank you so very much. Now, to conclude, I hope that the event today and the new publication, which is outside in print and which you can, of course, access on our website, will help to stimulate, to inform, and perhaps even advance discussions of how the disarmament community, but also the wider peace and security communities, can adapt to a quickly changing global security landscape and global security order. Obviously, we do this for ourselves, but we also want to do this for future generations. The report goes beyond providing just scenarios of the future. It also examines possible reactions to these scenarios, their possible implications, and provides initial ideas for action. And you will soon be hearing about them from the author herself. And then this will be open for discussion on the panel and with the audience more widely. I wish you very constructive discussions. I do have to apologize that I will have to leave a little early. But as I said, I wish you constructive discussions. Thank you all for coming here today. Bye.
Thank you, Robin. And I will now invite you to wear the earpiece and turn your attention to the screen, as I will give the floor to Ambassador Shona K. Richards, the Jamaican ambassador to Japan. And Ambassador, again, thank you so much for staying up so late in Tokyo, and also chair of the advisory board on disarmament matters. Ambassador, over to you. You have the floor.
Thank you, Giacomo, and Excellencies, distinguished participants. Good evening from Tokyo, Japan. Let me start by thanking UNIDIR for the opportunity to say a few words at the outset of today's event, particularly given the relevance of this new report and the growing use of foresight methodologies to increase our collective preparedness for future challenges. Robin has already given an excellent overview of initiatives by the UN in the domain of futures and foresight, including those being led by UNIDIR, which resulted in the report being launched today. Now, I wish to complement his remarks by expanding a bit on the importance and the benefits of focusing on foresight and reasons to adopt such an approach to explore issues of disarmament and arms control within the realm of international peace and security. Without a doubt, matters of disarmament and arms control play an important role in the maintenance of international peace and security, and more broadly, in the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. Yet, these processes are affected by, and in some cases are confronted with, several interlinked and intersecting issues and crises. Furthermore, there is the challenge of having to keep pace with rapid developments and evolutions in the international environment, not the least in the field of new and emerging technologies. So how can we navigate the ongoing global changes and uncertain futures? Foresight is a powerful tool and a valuable one to help us to do so. Why? Firstly, foresight helps us as individuals, organizations to be better prepared to deal with unpredictability and to increase resilience in the face of it. It can also make us consider what actions are available today and could be taken to mitigate or avoid unwanted futures and pave the path for preferred futures. As we all know, the future is not predetermined and thus will always remain unpredictable. And here I must emphasize that foresight does not predict the future, but rather helps us to prepare for it. One particular quote summarizes this element quite well, and it reads, "The future is unknowable, yet imaginable." So let me say it again. The future is unknowable, yet imaginable. Now, secondly, foresight allows us to explore and consider complex intersection, interconnection, and interaction between a range of elements which shape a system. This function is particularly important in the current context of a polycrisis in which we find ourselves, and where there are several different crises taking place simultaneously, all the while intersecting, amplifying, and affecting one another. In this vein, let me emphasize that foresight is different from forecasting. Forecasting bases itself on past and present data and trends analysis to make predictions about the future. Forecasting also focuses on one specific trend, for instance, such as GDP or population growth. On the other hand, foresight, as I've just mentioned, considers the complex intersection, interconnection, and interaction between a range of elements which shape a system. Moreover, exploring the interlinkages and connections between different elements that shape the world we live in, when done in a structured way, such as through foresight, can help us to understand the complexities of our system. Specifically, foresight techniques enable the exploration of possible, plausible, probable, and preferable futures that may emerge. Overall, it is a tool which can help manage uncertainty, not by giving us answers about what the future holds, but by helping us to do more to be prepared for a whole range of potential outcomes. A third and another valuable use of foresight is the opportunity it provides to creatively consider a wider range of policy options and solutions to map against this wide range of potential futures. Notably, it improves our ability to make decisions without relying solely on the assumption of how the world is today, but take into consideration how it could change, thus leading to policies that are sustainable and adaptable. Now, my last point pertains to future scenarios, the foresight methodology utilized in the current report being launched today. Scenarios place users in a position where they can think of the world from a different perspective than their own. It can help remove them from any fixations they may have regarding specific past or current issues. Now, doing so, however, does not remove such biases. Instead, it helps participants to think beyond them. Scenarios help provide a safe space, therefore, to discuss hypothetical future situations and what can be done about them, while also giving individuals freedom to challenge existing assumptions. All in all, the use of foresight approaches can help drive a more agile, resilient, creative, and future-focused mindset, all attributes that are necessary to enable forward-thinking policies which are adaptable to unpredictable future changes and evolutions. It is therefore no surprise that increasingly foresight is used in governments, international organizations like the United Nations, companies, and the military. It is also for these reasons that the United Nations Advisory Board on Disarmament Matters will be conducting a 2-year strategic foresight exercise in order to dig further into some of the themes and issues emanating from UNIDIR's research. In particular, we will use foresight to identify and analyze relevant peace and security trends emanating from advances in science and technology, as well as their associated risks and opportunities. At the heart of Secretary General Guterres' groundbreaking Our Common Agenda is his call for a systematic focus on future generations in our decision-making processes and to improve strategic foresight and risk analysis. UNIDIR's latest report responds to the Secretary General's call and is a pioneering step in the critical field of disarmament, which I commend to you all. I hope that you will find this report, which outlines both the challenges emerging from various future scenarios and possible actions that could be undertaken by a range of stakeholders, relevant and useful in your own work and reflections. Finally, having also highlighted the merits of the scenario methodology, I want to call your attention to the companion report, which provides an in-depth overview of the methodology used by the research team. It has been made public to allow for access beyond UNIDIR. Let me really thank and commend Robin and the Science and Technology team for this timely and pioneering publication. Thank you all for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your kind words and for your important scene-setting remarks. I now wish to move to the presentations and contributions from our panelists, starting on my left with my colleague, Sarah Grand-Clément, who is also the author of the new report that we are launching. So Sarah will take a few minutes to present our work and the findings that have emerged. So if you haven't had the time to read it yet, this probably presentation will give you kind of a crash course on everything that we did. And following from Sarah's presentation, we will be very happy to hear perspectives from our two guest speakers today. At the very far right of the table, we have Ambassador Thomas Kobel, a permanent representative of Germany to the Conference on Disarmament here in Geneva. And then to his left, Ms. Tiana Desker, Director of Strategic Futures and Emerging Technologies at the Ministry of Defense in Singapore. So, Sarah, over to you to run us through the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Giacomo, and good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy to be able to share more information on the study that we have conducted for over a year now, and most importantly, give you an overview of its findings. The study, as you heard, employed foresight to explore threats to international security linked to arms control and disarmament, with a view to identifying options for actions which could mitigate the identified challenges. So during my presentation, I therefore look forward to explaining the approach taken and how it drove the findings contained in the report, as well as the findings themselves. Next slide, please. So Robin and Ambassador Richards already gave an excellent overview of the context within which the study sits, as well as the benefits of employing foresight to consider complex issues in a future-focused manner. So I will dive right into the research focus and the scope of the study. Our aim was to first develop plausible scenarios depicting the state of the world in 2045, the UN's 100th anniversary. Using these scenarios to enable discussion, we sought to understand how the various study participants felt about these different futures, and therefore explore what the different scenarios might entail for international security and the United Nations, with a specific focus on global challenges and threats to peace and security that pertain to arms control and disarmament. Then, we identified pathways for action to address the challenges and threats identified. Next slide, please. Of course, this was rather a vast endeavor, as you can imagine, so we therefore sought to make sure it was as focused as possible, and I'm outlining this just so you ensure that you understand why we made certain decisions. To do so, our starting point was, of course, international peace and security, and we focused specifically on threats to the work of the United Nations in the area of multilateral arms control and disarmament, recognizing, of course, that there are issues pertaining to international peace and security, amongst other aspects beyond just this area. We also broke down the concept of international security into bite-sized chunks to include examination of international security from the lens of human, national, regional, and global security. Finally, we also acknowledged that our scenarios, and thus our discussions of challenges and pathways to action, had to be kept at a level of abstraction, as we weren't able to examine specific country or regional level issues. However, we sought to capture these issues at the macro level to the extent possible. Next slide, please. In the interest of time, I won't be going into the detail of the scenario development process, but I just wish to mention that the scenario creation was a lengthy, consultative, and collaborative endeavor with the aim of creating not just hypothetical, but also complex and credible scenarios of the future. Specifically, the scenarios present a combination of 20 different elements or factors and their projections or the ways that they might develop. And next slide, please. These 20 factors were shortlisted from a longer list of 70 factors. If you could just click one more time. Thank you. Which were identified through a range of means, including review of the literature, as well as brainstorming sessions. The methodological approach is detailed in the companion report mentioned by Ambassador Richards, which you can also find on our website alongside the main report. Next slide, please. A total of 5 scenarios emerged from the scenario creation process and were used as tools for discussion in workshops that brought together a range of United Nations entities, member states, as well as representatives from academia, civil society, and the private sector. I unfortunately won't have time to go through and explain each of the scenarios in depth, but will nonetheless aim to give you a flavor of each. And of course, you can read the full-length narratives of these in the companion report. So starting first with A Modern Utopia and Paradise Lost, which you can see on the screen are polar opposites, as both their names and placement on the chart would suggest. On the one hand, we have a future where positive developments have occurred both at the international and at the national levels. For example, we witness more cooperation, there's a significant effort invested to ensure and maintain peace, and more equal and participative democracies. Whereas on the other hand, Paradise Lost features a future which is the complete opposite. Then we have 3 scenarios which fall in the middle of these 2 extremes, but nonetheless are quite different one to the other. Waiting for Godot is a future which has stagnated. Issues have not been resolved in the intervening 20 or so years, but they have not evolved as poorly as what we can see in Paradise Lost. One of the most notable aspects in Waiting for Godot is how states are no longer the most important players in international relations. War and Peace and Fragmented Fault Lines both feature a number of tensions and fragmentations. However, in War and Peace, this has boiled over an actual conflict, which has also had a spillover effect at the national level and across society. Whereas in Fragmented Fault Lines, conflicts are mainly under the threshold, and the domestic situations are generally stable. Next slide, please. During the course of the project, we were also quite interested to explore what one wants to see happen versus what one thinks might happen. So we asked each of the workshop participants to complete a questionnaire to tease out what scenarios best match the present day, the expected future, and the desired future. There's quite a lot I could unpack here, but in the interest of time, I will only highlight the responses regarding the expected versus the desired futures. As you can see, A Modern Utopia is, perhaps unsurprisingly, the desired future. But it is also the least expected future. That would go to War and Peace, which is also the least desired future after Paradise Lost, so you can already kind of see the tensions there. Finally, Fragmented Fault Lines also stands out as being the second most desired future, while also scoring fairly highly as one of the expected futures. Next slide, please. That was just to give you an overview of the scenarios because they were used to facilitate discussions during a series of workshops. So the findings presented from here on out are based on a range of stakeholder inputs, primarily from colleagues within the United Nations system, member state representatives, but also academia, civil society organizations, and private sector actors. Namely, the discussions generated and based on the scenarios led to us identifying a range of threats, which we grouped under 7 broad themes. Here, I should note that the themes and the threats are not exhaustive, nor do they aim to be. The scenarios and the types of participants helped shape these challenges and these themes, and also the focus of our study being on multilateral arms control and disarmament also focused or helped shape these themes. And thus, other themes or threats would have been identified with a different set of participants and with a different study focus. Next slide, please. I don't have the time, unfortunately, to go through each of the 7 themes and their respective threats, so I will focus on the first one, just to give you a flavor of some of the challenges we identified. Next slide, please. So the threats identified cover a range of issues, some of which may appear at first glance to be outside the remit of arms control and disarmament. However, high-level issues relating to the United Nations as a whole affect specific issues pertaining to arms control and disarmament, as the discussions within the workshops highlighted. And as you can see, also demonstrated within this first theme, which is that of future and relevance of the United Nations. 6 main challenges emerged under this umbrella, pertaining to inclusiveness within decision-making structures, the threat of possible lack of engagement in multilateralism, and specifically from existing processes pertaining to arms control and disarmament, the ability by the United Nations to cope with polycrises, the over-politicization of issues dealt within the United Nations, divisions and competition between member states, and the weakening of states or their authority in international relations. Overall, what emerged from this particular theme and its threats is the fact that the United Nations is seen as critical. And in instances where, in certain scenarios, it appeared deprioritized, ineffective, or irrelevant and unable to fulfill its mission, outcomes felt bleaker, and ability to achieve effective multilateralism and solve global issues felt much more difficult, if not impossible, by the workshop participants. This was just one of the 7 themes, but now I'll just go to the next slide and move to, we talked about the challenges, and identifying the challenges is one thing, but the other is understanding what can be done to address these threats. So bringing the scenarios back into the picture here, this entailed exploring what actions can we take to achieve the desired future, which in this case we found out was a modern utopia. So the report presents a long list of pathways for action. Just click one more time, please. So these pathways for action were mapped against the threats, and though in reality many of the themes and threats and consequently pathways for action they all have some level of overlap or linkages between them. So these pathways for actions, I should stress though, are not recommendations, although the hope is that they could be in the future developed as such. Right now, rather, they present avenues for reflection on what could be undertaken to address the threats identified, acting as either a starting point or in some cases a continuation point for conversation and action around these issues. So next slide, please. I won't go through all 67 pathways and leave that to your own reading time, but instead provide a summary of what these pathways include, using a couple of examples, starting with the disarmament machinery theme, and specifically one of the challenges they're under, which was weapons as a deterrence approach challenge. So 8 core pathways feature under this challenge. Not all could fit on this slide, so here you'll only see 4. But there are also linkages to the pathways featured under other challenges. So we also sought to draw out these linkages in the report. So for example, the threat marginalization of non-state actors in international relations featured interlinked pathways for action, and that is highlighted in the report. For this specific threat, so weapons as a deterrence approach, pathways for action notably include the importance of encouraging and improving transparency around spending and weapons, noting that this can help understand the reality around weapons holdings and reduce the need to purchase or develop more weapon systems. And overall, the aim here is to put in place measures to increase trust. Another pathway in a similar vein is that of employing confidence-building measures. These are already employed to some extent, but the findings discuss widening their use, including at bilateral and regional levels. Next slide, please. Under the theme non-traditional threats to peace and security, and its related challenge, insufficient preparation for non-traditional threats, here we find pathways for action relating to involving a wider set of actors to contribute to discussions and processes, ensuring that new instruments are made adaptable to future change, improving early warning mechanisms, and re-examining traditionally held concepts, such as peace or conflict. Next slide, please. Using foresight in this way helped to highlight what we would like to happen in the future as regards international peace and security in relation to arms control and disarmament specifically, but also more broadly, and also find out what we want to avoid. It also helped discuss the threats that we need to address to move away from the least desired futures and towards the preferred future. The research findings also show that it is not possible to address threats to international security as they relate to weapons and disarmament only. To enable progress in these areas requires actions in many others, and more broadly, portraying the interlinked nature of many of these threats and subsequently their pathways for action. There are other additional points for reflection specific to the pathways for action. First, the time frame necessary to enact the various pathways will vary. There should be acknowledgement and understanding that some issues will take years, if not decades, to address, whereas others will be much faster. Second, these pathways for action would require multiple stakeholders to achieve. Dialogue, agreement, and collaborative partnership will be needed to define not only the way forward on the pathways for action, but also how to enact them. Third, broader normative concepts such as that of trust, transparency, and accountability are necessary for the pathways for action to be successful. Overall, we hope that these findings and pathways can serve as a conversation starter, and to that end, we look forward to engaging in substantive discussions over the findings contained in this report, and to help guide thinking as it relates to arms control and disarmament and broader international peace and security in the lead up to the Summit of the Future and beyond. Next slide, please. In closing, I just want to thank you all for your attention, but also recognize all the people who contributed to this research in various and very important ways, and notably the expert group who helped create the scenarios, as well as to all the workshop and interview participants, and mostly to the rest of the project team, for which I am only the mere figurehead here, which includes Giacomo Persipaoli and Harry Deng. You can find both reports online on our website, as well as some physical copies in the room, as was already mentioned before. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Sarah, for this overview of the study and its findings. In 10 minutes, you managed to give a great teaser of what is included in the report. We hope that we've captured your attention and interest, and please do take the time to go over it, because there is really a lot of very interesting and thought-provoking content in the report itself. I now wish to turn to our two panelists that have been very patiently waiting until now. And I would like to start by, first of all, acknowledging that we've been using the term foresight as if it was one thing, but the range of foresight tools and methods that exist is very, very broad. And sometimes the reason why foresight exercises either fail to deliver their intended outcome or are not necessarily as successful as one would like is because the wrong tool was used for the wrong reason. So one of the big challenges when we're talking about foresight is try to identify the right tool for to answer the question that you want to answer. So with this as a caveat, a question that I have for both of our panelists is, could you please briefly explain to us what value do you see emerging from the field of strategic foresight, for arms control and disarmament? So what kind of added value could this sort of methodologies as a family, or this reflecting specifically on the report, the scenario-based scenario analysis, what kind of benefit could it bring to the arms control and disarmament work and community? Ambassador, perhaps you want to go first?
No, you haven't turned it off.
Yes.
Yet, right now. Okay. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for inviting me. And first of all, I would like to recommend that the work of Sarah Grand-Clément and the whole team for this report. I had the opportunity to run through it even before the event, and it's really, I think, a tremendous work you have been done, and coming to your question, I think that's exactly the kind of of contribution, of input, which we need in the run up to the summit of the future. Because I think when we have to, we need a comprehensive approach to address the various challenges we are facing. But coming to your question, I think there, when it comes to disarmament and arms control, there are certainly several contributions, valuable contributions, which could be brought up by foresights like this. But perhaps let me just highlight 4 of them. First, I think certainly it can help, and it helps, and certainly to an early identification of emerging threats, and I mean emerging threats like developments like withdrawals from arms treaty, from changes in the geopolitical situation, which causes tension. So that's certainly the first advantage I see, early identification of emerging threats. And which goes directly along with this is also the contribution to anticipating future technology advancements, which might, not necessarily, but could also contribute to emerging threats. And I think in this regard, I would point out to what we are now trying since several years is to being in front of the wave when it comes to lethal autonomous weapon systems. I think this is just one point, which is one which is already at the heart of our discussions, but there are others which we might not see yet, and I think it's very helpful to have that. And as a consequence, then hopefully this would lead also to a more robust strategic planning in the respective governments and ministries, and in the end also hopefully lead up to the allocation of the necessary resources to face these challenges. I think these are very concrete examples where I see really a valuable contribution by foresight exercises like this. And as I said, thank you very much again for this tremendous work and this very, very interesting contribution. Thank you.
Okay. Congratulations. So it's a huge achievement. There's so much work that goes into a report like this. All those workshops, really much of the so much of the value, it's even beyond this report. It's those workshops that you organize, the conversations that were stimulated. And then, of course, the report provides the stimuli for even further conversations on these issues. So my own background, I had my career partly doing strategic foresight and partly in international security. And I do feel the potential for these tools to enrich our conversations here. Strategic foresight, it's a collection of tools for understanding the future that combines the empirical with imagination. And it's this deliberate search for alternative ways of thinking about the future. And I do think that there are 3 ways which we can see how foresight can bring something to the conversation on arms control and disarmament. So firstly, foresight tools, because they're about identifying new ways of seeing the future. In arms control and disarmament, these discussions, they've been ongoing for for so many years, many decades. And so there's such a history of engagement. And so after all that, despite all the differences, in a way, I believe we do start to see the future in some of the same ways. So how to break out of that? We start to see the future that some things are possible and not possible. Some things have already been tried and they've failed, so there's no need to try them again. There are certain repeating patterns that we see and predict. So the hope is that foresight tools can offer these new possibilities that don't conform to those old repeating patterns, and allow us to gently question our assumptions about what can be done. The second value is that foresight tools provide a method to manage complexity. So there's so many variables when we think about the future, the economic, technological, geopolitical, environmental. Futures tools provide that frame to organize these variables. They facilitate a way for experts from different domains to have productive conversations. And arms control and disarmament is similar. The issues require such a range of perspectives. Diplomats, lawyers, civil society, military, industry, and each speaks a language of their own profession with its own vocabulary. So foresight tools can help to create a common vocabulary. And lastly, I would say that with foresight, while we ostensibly talk about the future, in practice, we're often talking about the present. You could say that we borrow the future to create a safe space to talk about the present, to address what otherwise may not feel appropriate to be discussed. So I think in that way, it really can add value.
Thank you to both of you. Tiana, if you don't mind, I'll stay with you for the next question. And it's really building on your expertise in the application of foresight. How can this methodology or this approach be used to kind of inject action and implement policies, particularly in relation or in the domain of peace and security? And are there any examples that you can share of how foresight has contributed to do so, that potentially also, to advance policy planning and implementation?
So I would say that for this study, right, even if you don't see it immediately, there is already action that is being generated. Because when you hold a workshop and you're asking new questions and there are discussions on new topics that are emerging, these already create the seeds for new action. It may not be tied, I mean, no one might necessarily know that it came from the workshop, but in its quiet way, the action is already brewing. And likewise, the report will also do likewise. But as for your question of maybe an example from my own experience, foresight, it's a big thing in the Singapore government. We've invested heavily in strategic foresight since the 1980s, because as a small country, we have this sense that we have to anticipate change and be adaptable. And so every ministry has a foresight team, and I personally run the foresight team in the Ministry of Defense. So let me share a story of trying to translate foresight to action in my own context with security professionals. So a number of years ago, I worked on a scenario project, and it became very clear that a major blind spot for a lot of armed forces was not really paying enough attention to climate change. Everybody was aware about climate change, but there was no sense of urgency. So what could we do about this? So we tried various things, and eventually we had scenarios. And so we painted this scenario, which is in 2040, the energy transition has been proceeding. Industries all around the world will have been decarbonizing, but the defense sector is a laggard. And so in this scenario, in 2040, it becomes apparent that defense is contributing 70% of government emissions. And this, of course, is outrageous for members of the public, for citizens, and their demands that militaries have to go immediately to net zero. And so many militaries regret that they didn't invest earlier in lower emissions platforms. So we use this scenario to sort of confront Armed Forces colleagues about climate change, and I think it did provoke them. And so, I mean, I think looking back, there's been action. So we've rolled out renewables in our bases. We've been doing trials for green fuels for our platforms, and we have a new standard of transparency to publicly release our emissions figures every year. So yes, I see a lot of prospect for that translation to action.
Thank you. And this is also a great example that shows how scenarios can be used to really either detect signals of change that we want to avoid, because I'm assuming they would not like to find themselves in that situation, and therefore taking action to prevent drifting in a certain direction, or if there is, the other end of the spectrum is taking action today to steer the course in a more virtuous direction that we want to achieve. I think scenarios can do both. Ambassador, I'd like to come back to you with another question, and you will have seen that our report outlines a number of 67 pathways for action, and we also know that the new Agenda for Peace includes a range of recommendations, and of course there is an overlap, at least at the topic level, if not sometimes in the specific pathway or recommendation with our report. So building upon these, and from your perspective, what do you think would be most helpful for member states to do in order to prepare for the upcoming Summit of the Future and the Pact for the Future, which are both very fast approaching?
This one? Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the question. I think exercises like this are exactly what we need in the run-up to the Summit of the Future, and I think that's the contribution which those foresight exercises can do. What we need is as I said, is a comprehensive approach to address the various aspects which we have to take care of. And I think with the different issues which have been identified for the Summit of the Future, we are really covering these different important fields, starting with global economic and financial structure, over digital compact to all these peace and security issues. And I think which is very important is that we have a more holistic view also when it comes to security. I think security is not just an issue which is defined by disarmament, arms control, and disarmament. It's certainly a much larger context which we have to take, which we have to concentrate on. In the context of the German national security strategy, we are speaking about the integrated security, and that means, and I think it goes a little bit together with what you just explained in your case, is that we are not just taking care. There are three components which are in there. The one is disarmament and arms control in the field of protection from war and violence. So this can be done by disarmament and arms control. This can be also done by robust just military. This is clear, but that's just one component when it comes to security. The other one is resilience. It's the resilience of societies, resilience in order to defend the freedoms which a certain community, a certain society possesses, and the ability to defend these freedoms also in order in a way to be not dependent, to be ready to safeguarding the values through a sort of inner strength. So that's the second part of security. And the third one, and that's something which is very, very important. The third one is really the safeguarding of our natural resources, because without this, security doesn't really make sense. So the security has to be built up of these three different components, and we have to work for them, and we cannot concentrate on the disarmament and arms control sector alone. But being here an ambassador to the Conference of Disarmament, concentrating, focusing on this one component of global security, I think it is clear, especially at these in these times where we are living through a sort of a watershed era, is that we have to take care that in these times that disarmament and non-proliferation efforts have to be maintained. There's one example I like to tell in this context is that's the president of the NPT review conference, who was a great soccer fan, who told this those days that it's with disarmament and arms control it's like when we were playing for a long time, but we didn't manage to score anymore, and now we are in a situation that we have even the ball is flat now, and it's now even harder to play the match we were used to play. And in this situation, what we have to really take care of is to preserve the playground. We have to make sure that the playground survives, that the stadium exists, because we have to be ready to start the match whenever it is possible. Besides preserving the playground, it's also very important to reinflate the ball, but that's even harder. And we are trying this as well. But what I wanted to say is so we have to have a broader picture when it comes to security. Well beyond disarmament and arms control, and we have also, on the other hand, concentrate on the things which are feasible under the given circumstances.
Thank you. And to conclude, the last few thoughts that both of you may have, perhaps starting with Tiana and finishing with the ambassador. Where can we go from here? So what other aspects of disarmament, arms control, or more generally international peace and security could we as UNIDIR, or could others that are interested in this issue examine through the use of foresight? 30 seconds, please.
So two thoughts. The first is that it might be possible to do more in-depth studies on particular domains, such as outer space. And the second is that foresight tools could also be used to study the interconnections between different domains. So, for example, how emerging technologies like cyber, AI, and space have a bearing on nuclear strategic stability.
I very much agree, and I think to a certain extent, UNIDIR is already working in this field. It's to say, as I said at the beginning, to look into emerging technologies, to give an early warning to a certain way if there are developments which may turn out to the negative, but also when it comes to proliferation with also the potential of destabilizing certain regions. I think these kind of studies are very, very important and helpful. And it's even when it comes to foresight, that's just a personal wish. I would be very interested in a sort of a foresight study to see what the world would look like without the disarmament treaties we still have and are still in force, just to see what is the real value, because I have the impression that we are living in a time where we are thinking a treaty like the NPT, that's given for granted, and if we don't have an NPT, it won't change much, because it's something which is a certain way, or it's also a customary law. So, and would be a very interesting foresight study. But as I said, I think UNIDIR is already doing this, and I can just encourage you to go on with this work.
Here you go. Thank you so much to both of you for these ideas, and I think the cost of non-disarmament, I think, is probably the title of our next study. And thanks so much for that. We will credit you for the idea. I'm afraid we're running out of time, and I'm really sorry we didn't have the chance to open the floor. We do have 15 minutes. Oh, sorry. Great. I thought in my notes I had closing at 3:30. So fine. No. Please, I'll take that back. So we do have time for questions and comments from the floor or colleagues online. I see one hand raised here, two hands here in the room. Please, three hands. Great. Please do introduce yourself as you take the floor for the first time. And please, starting on my right.
Alev Mine of the One Goal Initiative for Governance. I am very pleasantly surprised to learn that foresight is being done in that manner, with scenarios, deliberations, and things like that. Because if you look at my website, the One Goal, it's called onegoalinitiative.org, you will see that this process is at the center of what I want to do. And about that, I'm finding, for instance, that the relative durations of various processes in the various factors considered are very important. The precision of the relative timing that we foresee is very important, because it can completely change the scenario if one thing happens before the other. And then also the behavior at limit of the system considered, it seems to be very important. So what I'm intending to do is to use this kind of thing for everything, not just one field in governance. And so I'm wondering if there is also a computational ingredient in these processes. Are these processes being, like, the methodology, is it being developed? If yes, how can I collaborate with you? And also, I have this one practical question. How do you deal with the sort of a preconceived notion of where a scenario will go or should go of the participants, even if they don't want to have any preconceptions? It's like if you're riding a bicycle and you see a banana and you go, I don't want to go to that banana. I don't want to, and you do, because that's where you're looking at, So this kind of phenomenon, how do you deal with that? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having this meeting today, giving us the presentation, and also for publishing such a useful report. For introduction, I'm Andreas Bilgeri from the Austrian Permanent Mission here in Geneva. I'm speaking here also maybe from a disarmament perspective and what this means for our work and how it is useful. I mean, first of all, one comment, I think for small states like Austria, the modern utopia is the only way forward. All the other scenarios would come at the cost of small states. I mean, bigger ones might thrive, but the small ones, with some exception, if you have something like the European Union, but otherwise small states might be the ones who suffer in all those scenarios except for one. So I think that's very important here, and why we have to put some effort into these foresights and to get into the right path. Second point, I very much like this kind of scenario way, and also that we are learning about this instrument and that we are having the opportunity to apply it now. I very much also like the crystal ball and on the cover and the kind of the attempt to look into different scenarios, which is highly important in our work, but also comes with another layer, which means that all our measures and all our instruments that we are setting up from now on, which is difficult, as Ambassador Goebel has laid out, have to be future-proof. So if we set out for new instruments, for new legally binding rules, they have to be set up in a way that they reflect values that are also still valid in 20 years' time, in 2045, for example. We have a good tradition in that, which comes from the Geneva Convention, but also other instruments like the BWC or I noted another one that was a good example, but I forgot it. We have done that. We are usually quite good at it, but the new technologies are a challenge there. And if we don't know what these technologies are and what is coming, we cannot really address them. So the main line or the baseline is that we have to make them on the basis of values that are timeless. And this is one of the main points I want to make. And now I'm coming to the question that I wanted to have. And another of the most important points in this report is the role of non-state actors. This is a challenge where I think we in the disarmament community or as states are not prepared for. There are some attempts, especially in cyber, where this has already been done. But in all other domains, especially in the disarmament, classic disarmament field, we don't know yet how to include non-state actors, how to address the challenges and how to work with them. And here, something like this is extremely valuable. And actually, I would ask the drafters of the report, but also the other persons on the panel for their kind of ideas on how to address this, how to include them. The resolution that was adopted last year in the General Assembly on laws has industry as one of the actors, stakeholders to put information for the SG's report that will be published on this topic. This is one way to do it. We are not sure if it is the best way, but it is some way to include them. What other ways do we have? And I'm quite convinced that it is highly necessary. Otherwise, we will don't look at the right challenges for the future. I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, hello. Well, I can only join the prior colleagues in commending your work and in finding the methodology itself very interesting, because indeed it gives articulating language that can be unifying. My question is going to be fairly concrete, and maybe it's a request that you might apply the foresight methodology to this realm, which is how do you see the regulation regarding autonomous weapons evolving? Because if I were to and sorry, by means of introduction, and Maria from the United Nations Alliance of Civilizations. If I were to see one major threat that can tilt towards one of the worst scenarios, if not the least desirable ones, I guess this would be one of them. And I know it has been also brought to the attention in a call by the Secretary General of the UN and the Red Cross recently in October 2023, if I'm not mistaken. So how do you see this, in particular, this threat being dealt with, taking into account the current climate? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's working. Yes. Thank you very much for this first set of questions. I don't see any additional questions online, so perhaps we take a go at answering these first three. Sarah, you want to start the one methodology, or you pick, do whatever you want, and then I'll try to come in if I have anything to add.
Thank you very much for your questions and for your kind words about the report. On the first question on methodology, so we did use software to help us with the calculations. So this is all made transparent in the companion methodological report. So the software helped us to undertake the calculations, to identify the direct and indirect relationships between the factors, to understand how they influence each other, to what extent. So it helped. Obviously, you can do this without using software. It was our methodological choice to do this, but for this specific instance, we did use a fairly robust and quantitative, in a way, approach to it. But there are many, as Giacomo said, there are many different types of approaches to foresight, and similarly, there are many different approaches to the creation of scenarios, and this is only one such aspect. So it's really not the only one. In terms of dealing with kind of preconceived notions, it is definitely something that we were, aware of in the process. Everybody will have biases, and we can never remove these biases. However, we sought to mitigate those by ensuring we had a sufficient number of people inputting their thoughts, and so it wasn't. We sought to mitigate biases in this way to ensure that there was sufficient different types of stakeholders by background or organization. So there was sufficient kind of discussion on this matter, and it wasn't just a unified voice. But of course, this could always be improved upon. So really, I would highly suggest that for any such exercise, have a wide range of stakeholders as possible in terms of the participants, whether that's creation of the scenarios or discussing the scenarios. In terms of the role of non-state actors, indeed, this is something that the report touches upon. It was a threat, and several pathways for actions are highlighted. Again, we call these pathways for actions, not recommendations, because they, as we realized doing this, that it goes beyond arms control and disarmament, as Ambassador Goebel mentioned. It's impossible to just look at our sphere, and it would require a much broader conversation as to how we affect the change from the approval process for NSA accreditation all the way to improving diverse NSA representation and participation in processes. But I'll let other panelists also answer on that. In terms of how the regulation on laws will evolve, I would argue that's more forecasting than foresight, so I'm not going to attempt an answer on that, but that would make for a very interesting exercise where we discuss what kind of future we want to see, or what impacts different types of regulations or non-regulations might have, and how we want to mitigate those impacts. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. And just to add one quick point on the issue of non-state actors, I think that if we're looking at the role of non-state actors or the involvement of non-state actors in multilateral processes, there are a series of barriers, most of them political, to be honest. So it's a choice that member states have to make the participation of these non-state actors more complicated than potentially it should be. But I see two potential pathways. One is, as new instruments, new GGs, or new, instruments are designed, and there are good precedents that exist already at the UN. So it's not about reinventing the wheel, but it's really trying to embed in the mandates of these bodies and of these instruments specific roles for these non-state actors. So we want civil society to be part of the discussions to do this. And what is in the mandate, then it becomes, for example, it could be industry, it could be civil society. But once it's in the mandate, it goes beyond a mere rules of procedure discussion, and it's more substantive. So anchoring the participation to a specific meaning and purpose, I think, would be a possible way out of this situation, although how easy that would be in the current political context, that's another story. But even if at the multilateral level it's challenging, no one is stopping you from embedding non-state actors in your own national decision-making processes. There is no other there is no one other than yourself. They're responsible for making sure that as you develop your own national positions, your own national strategies, you do that in a consultative way that takes into account all of the the contributions that you may get at the national level from industry, civil society, academia, the scientific community, etc. So start nationally, and then try to that will make a much stronger case when you go on the multilateral kind of arena. I don't know if any of our panelists have anything else they would like to add based on these three questions. Please, Ambassador.
Just on the last point, I agree with what you have just said, but concerning non-state actors, I think it's a very pertinent question indeed, how to engage with them. I think there's one thing which is clear. There are a lot of areas now, starting with cyber, artificial intelligence, space, where they play a very crucial role, and it's certainly something which we cannot put back into the box and renationalize all these industries. So we have to find a solution for that. But I think there's one point which is very important as well. Industry is interested in these processes. It's not that they are in a certain way opposed to cooperation. So I think we can. So there's just one example. For example, in the ATT, when we were discussing post-shipment cooperation, which makes it also necessary to have a close cooperation with all the with the industry in order to prepare for that. There was a very, very good dialogue, and it's still continuing. And we can build on that. So it's not something where we have to fight against an adversary group. No, we have a common interest, perhaps not always the same, but we have certainly points in common which we can build on.
Yeah, my observation is that, say, for civil society, it's already clear how they fit in, and many civil society actors are already quite engaged. But for industry, especially for some of those players that are relevant for, say, the discussion on laws and AI space, these are smaller players. They might be startups. They may not see that they should be involved and how to be involved, what's the role that they should play. There's a need for some kind of engagement with them, so that they recognize that eventually, what is decided in terms of governance, regulation will affect them. In any case, deteriorating international security conditions are going to affect them. And I think that the Track 1.5s that are being organized are a very good way to bring industry into the conversation. So yeah.
Thank you very much, both of you, for sharing with us your views on the questions as well. And I can see how the non-state actors is kind of a very crucial role. And to be frank, that's probably one of the biggest challenges that we have ahead of us. If we want to make sure that the UN remains relevant and fit for purpose, it has to find a way of doing a better job in involving these actors. I think we're now really out of time. So thank you so much. Please join me in thanking our wonderful speakers here today. Thank you for all coming in person or online. We remain available to discuss this more, whether you want to do more foresight at the national level, whether you want to do it at the regional level, or you want to try to bring foresight into one of the many processes that you're following. We're here at your disposal. As Robin said at the beginning, this is the beginning of a journey. It wasn't like a one-off exercise just to see if we like doing it. I think there is a lot of value in doing this sort of work. I'm glad that you found also this value. So please do not hesitate to be in touch if you would like to learn more, or if you would like us to come to you, whether it's, again, national, regional, or more at the international level, to do more of these exercises. So thank you so much, and have a great rest of the day.